This is a story from Africa and it's called Murile and the Underworld. Once upon a time, long, long ago in Africa, when vast herds of animals roamed freely across the African plain, when people lived together in villages in their tribal lands before they scattered and went to the cities for work, there lived a young girl called Murile. And as was the custom, the children helped with the chores. And Murile and her young brother went every day to the family bean fields to chase away the monkeys. They set off before dawn, carrying with them a turai, a round metal basin, and a stick, a kiboko, to beat the turai. And all day long, the children raced up and down the bean field, making a great noise and chasing away the monkeys. Now one day, it was particularly hot, and the monkeys were very mischievous. And the sun beat down on the children, and they became so thirsty that they put down their turais, and they went to drink at the nearby lake. And the water was cool and fresh, and they splashed their faces and their heads, and they waded into the water and splashed each other and played as children do. And when they got back to the bean field, the monkeys had eaten every bean and smashed the plants. There was not even one handful of beans to eat or to replant. Murile was so frightened of her mother's wrath that she ran back to the lake and she cast herself in and drowned. Down, down, down through the depths, Murile sank until she reached the entrance to the underworld. And there she met an old woman and her 3 daughters. And the old woman beckoned to her and said, "If you stay with me, I will teach you many things, and I will be your guide through the underworld." So Murile did stay with her, and she did indeed learn many things. But as the years passed, Murile began to think more and more of her family and her brother, and longed to see them again. And the old woman could see that Murile was pining and was unhappy. And so one day she asked Murile a strange question. She said, "Murile, do you prefer the hot or the cold?" Murile didn't understand the question, for in the underworld it is neither hot nor cold. And so she asked the old woman to repeat it. "Murile, do you prefer the hot or the cold?" Murile thought, and she remembered that last day when the sun was so hot and burned her skin and cracked her throat with thirst. And Murile said, "I prefer the cold." And the old woman dragged a huge earthenware jug over, filled with icy cold water, and told Murile to thrust in her arms and her hands. And Murile did, and the icy water tingled her skin and made her shudder. And when she drew out her arms, instead of little droplets of water on her skin was covered in bright jewels. Murile stepped into the jar, and again the water tingled her skin. And when she stepped out, her legs and her feet were covered in bright, sparkling jewels. Then the old lady dressed Murile in fine clothes and walked with her to the gate of the living and told Murile that she would have a happy life and would marry a fine man called Soweo and to look out for him. Now Murile was greatly welcomed by her family, and news very quickly spread through the villages that Murile had now returned and was now very rich. And the young men from all the villages began to walk towards Murile's village to ask for her to become their wife. More and more young men arrived in the village, but Murile refused them all because she was looking out for Soweo. And one day she saw him, taller than all the others, and standing back shyly, watching her. Soweo was disfigured by a skin disease over his body and his face, which made him look very ugly. But Murile remembered the old lady, and she knew that Soweo would be a good man, and so she asked Soweo if he would marry her. And they did, and there was a great feast. And because Murile was rich, she bought many cows and chickens and goats and built a fine house. And slowly the skin disease faded from Soweo, and he stood there, the most handsome of all men. Now, to begin with, the villagers are very pleased to have the rich young couple amongst them. But as time went on, they began to grumble among themselves and say, why should they have so much and we have so little? And their discontent spread out into the other villages. And the young men who had trekked to ask Murile to be their wife began to mutter among themselves, and they urged each other on into anger. And a few of them came and waited outside Murile's house, and with their fists and their sticks, they beat Soweo to death. Now, Murile had been in the underworld and learnt many things, and she had learnt how to bring the dead back to life. So she dragged the poor battered body of Soweo back into the house. And all night long she moaned and wailed and muttered incantations and spread oil upon the wounds of Soweo, until in the morning he arose, even stronger and taller than before. Now Murile knew that those young men would come back in the daytime to take her flocks and her jewels. So Soweo waited, and with his great strength he killed them all. Now, because Soweo and Murile had both been to the underworld, death had no fear for them. And eventually, when their time came, they accepted death calmly.